All right, so today's lesson is all about competition. Now, we spent some time at the beginning of class thinking about what that word compete and competition means. And we also learned that it's not always about just competing against somebody. In fact, the origins of the word are about striving together or working together or reaching for a common goal. So, the point of this part of the lesson is to introduce you to four key terms not only as we learn about competition, but as we explore competition in the context of our class business and how can we study our competition in order to find a great product. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at are the types of competitors. This is the competitor that I bet if when we say who is a competitor of this company, is what we think about, and that is a direct competitor. So businesses are selling products or services that are essentially the same. So the traditional examples of Apple and Microsoft, or the traditional examples of McDonald's and Burger King. So the Chevy Silverado and the Ford F-150, those are direct competitors. Those products are essentially the same. Mariano's and Jewel, those stores are essentially the same. Nike and Under Armour, again, companies are essentially the same. While, yes, they try to differentiate themselves and they try to do things better than their competitors, at the heart of it, they are essentially the same company. And so, again, when we think about competition, we tend to think about those that are in direct competition with us. So, if I'm going to open up a coffee shop here in Glenview, then certainly my direct competitors are going to be the existing chains of Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, but also Glenview Grind, Joe Donut. So again, the businesses that are selling essentially the same product. Okay, now, in addition to direct competitors, businesses also have to be aware of what we call indirect competitors. This conflict exists between vendors whose products or services are not the same, but that could satisfy the same consumer need. So before we get into some examples, let's think about if you were hungry, what are your options to be able to satisfy your need? Okay? If I need gas in my car, I don't necessarily have a lot of options in terms of what I can put in the car. I certainly have a lot of options in terms of what gas station I can go to, but for the most part, I have to put gas in the car. Just about everything else, there are a wide range of choices in terms of both direct and indirect competitors. All right, so let's look at some examples. A business like Chipotle versus the Glenview House. Now, we would certainly not think of them as the same business. But if I'm hungry, I could go to Chipotle or I could go to the Glenview House. The key with indirect competitors is understanding that consumers are going to spend money to fulfill that need. How they fill that need could be a direct competitor. Obviously, I could go to Chipotle, or I could go to Qdoba, or I could go to the Glenview House, or I could go to Grandpa's. But in this instance, we're looking at it. What are your options as a consumer when you're hungry? The Glenview Grind versus 7-Eleven. If I'm thirsty, or if I just want maybe something on the way to work, I could go to the Glenview Grind, or I could go to 7-Eleven. Chevy and BMW. We certainly wouldn't compare a vehicle, like the Chevy Malibu to a BMW 7 Series. But if a consumer is spending money on a vehicle, they could either buy a Chevy or a BMW. Right, so that really is kind of the who are our competitors. Now we're going to get into how do we compete? What are the factors that are going to separate all of these both direct and indirect competitors? Now, the first one is called a comparative advantage. Comparative advantages gives businesses the ability to produce and sell a good or service at a lower cost than its competitors. This advantage exists for very few businesses, and it certainly won't exist necessarily for our business. When we think about businesses that have the ability to produce or sell a good or service at a lower cost, it's really about scale and it's about mass production. So think about the millions and millions of products that McDonald's sells on a daily basis versus a company like Meatheads, who is much smaller in scale. McDonald's has the logistical advantage where they have so many locations where it's very easy for their suppliers to get their products to the stores. Whereas meatheads, not as many locations, and maybe the locations are a little bit more spread out. Again, Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts mass produces their donuts, and because of that, they're able to sell them at a lower price. Glenview Grind, in fact, doesn't even make their own donuts. They buy them from a local bakery and then resell. Probably the best example of a comparative advantage is Walmart versus everyone else. Walmart's tagline is everyday low prices. And the reason why is because, number one, they sell so many products and they sell mass quantities that allows them to sell or to buy them from their suppliers at a much lower price and then sell them to consumers for a much lower price. This is probably when we talk about competition, probably the advantage that we're least familiar with. And we're not really going to focus much on this, but it does exist. What we're really going to focus on is what we call the differential advantage, or a really important term is the differentiators. So unique benefits of a product that set it apart and above its competitors in the customer's viewpoint. So in the eyes of the customer, or what does the company say they do better? Let's look at some examples. Think about businesses that you go to or businesses that your family buys from, and they pay more money. They could go somewhere else. There is plenty of options, but they are willing to pay more to go to this business because, and then insert whatever that reason is. Okay. It could be a higher quality product. I think of the difference between a store like Whole Foods and Mariano's. If I want to go get, fresh produce, or go to the butcher and get meat or chicken or something like that, certainly Whole Foods is going to advertise and is going to say that their products are higher quality. And then that is reflected in a higher price than going to Mariano's and getting potentially a very similar product. Okay? Think about businesses that offer great customer service, where you will go there and maybe you could go somewhere else and save money, but you would rather pay the extra money to get the great customer service. Car dealerships oftentimes build really good relationships with businesses. Some families have been buying from the same car dealership for years, maybe even sometimes generations. And what happens is that dealership has the advantage where maybe the customer could go down to another dealership and save $500 or $1,000. But what advantages or what service do they provide that offsets that cost? So, for example, maybe a family is very loyal to a place like Jennings Chevrolet in Glenview. And they could maybe go to another Chevy dealership and save some money. But every time they bring their car in, they give them a free rental car for the time that their car is in for service. Or maybe they do things like they offer free oil changes for the first 2 years of buying a new car. So another great example that I think of when we think about a differential advantage is a place like Apt Electronics. They sell products just like Best Buy. They sell many of the same TVs that Walmart and Target sell. And you could potentially go to Walmart and Target and get it for a cheaper price. But a lot of times Apt Electronics goes above and beyond to try and enhance that customer experience and also keep you as a customer and be able to tell people, hey, I bought this TV from Apt. It was amazing. Everybody else should go there. All right. So again, those are the two things. So after watching this video, you're going to have some questions to fill out in that Google form. And then when we're done, we're going to come back together for an in-class activity and look at some competition in action.